There was a time when restarting the garden every spring would have made no sense to anyone. You grew what came back. You saved what produced seed. You divided roots in autumn and passed spare plants over the fence to the neighbor who would do the same for you in return. The garden was not something you restarted. It was something that continued through droughts, through wars, through the hardest winters, because the plants in it were chosen specifically to keep going without help. 13 vegetables made that possible. Not complicated plants, not rare ones. Ordinary vegetables grown in ordinary gardens by people who needed food to show up reliably, year after year, without fail. Most of them have nearly disappeared, not because they stopped working, because the food system moved on without them, and within a generation or two, the knowledge of what they were and why they mattered moved on too. They are still here, and once you plant them, they will be too. Welcome to the quiet garden. Let's get into it. 13. Potato onion. Plant one bulb in autumn. By the following summer, it has become a cluster, 6 to 12 new bulbs packed together underground where one used to be. Harvest the largest ones to eat. Replant the smallest. Next year, each of those becomes another cluster. The cycle moves forward indefinitely without any further cost. The potato onion, also called the multiplier onion, was grown across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia for thousands of years before the common bulb onion became the commercial standard. It was not replaced because it was inferior. It was replaced because it doesn't need to be bought repeatedly, and that quality doesn't suit a supply chain. The flavor sits between a shallot and a sweet onion, mild, concentrated, excellent raw and cooked. The bulbs store extremely well, often better than standard onions. And a household that kept potato onions never went without, because the plants replaced themselves season after season without assistance. One original purchase, one planting, a permanent onion supply that sustains and expands itself every year from that point forward. 12. Good King Henry. Good King Henry, Chenopodium bonus henricus, was a fixture in European kitchen gardens from the medieval period through the 19th century. It has almost entirely disappeared from modern growing, which is one of the stranger losses in the practical kitchen garden tradition. It is a perennial that gives 3 different harvests from a single planting, each arriving in sequence as the season warms. In early spring, the young shoots push up from cold ground and are eaten like asparagus, blanched, buttered, and served simply. A few weeks later, the mature leaves are cooked like spinach, with more protein, more iron, and a fuller flavor than spinach delivers. Later still, the flowering heads are harvested and cooked like broccoli. 3 vegetables, 1 plant, no replanting. It self-seeds gently without becoming invasive, grows in poor soil and partial shade, and returns larger every year from the same crown. It was replaced by spinach when spinach became cheap and widely available, a direct swap that cost the garden a versatile perennial and gained a demanding annual that produces only one of the 3 things good King Henry gave. 11. Scorzonera. Scorzonera has black skin, white flesh, and a flavor unlike anything in a modern supermarket, somewhere between parsnip and oyster, mild and layered in a way that takes a moment to place. It is a perennial root vegetable, which means the roots left in the ground after harvest continue growing the following year, becoming larger and more flavorful with every season they remain. Plants allowed to flower self-seed reliably, establishing new plants nearby without replanting. The patch maintains itself and slowly expands on its own. It grows in poor, dry, well-drained soil where carrots split and parsnips give up. It tolerates hard winters without protection. It was grown in European kitchen gardens for centuries and fell out of cultivation as the appetite for novelty and the convenience of buying replaced the habit of growing what persisted. What was lost is a root vegetable that improves with age, maintains its own patch, and produces a flavor that no commercial breeding program has bothered to replicate, because There is no obvious market for a vegetable that doesn't need to be sold every spring. 10. Turkish rocket. Turkish rocket, Bunias orientalis, is a perennial brassica almost nobody grows now, despite being one of the most useful plants available to anyone gardening in a cold climate. It pushes through the ground in very early spring, sometimes before the last frost has passed, sometimes visibly through the final snow, producing edible leaves before almost anything else in the garden has germinated. A few weeks later, it sends up stems of tight flower buds that are harvested and cooked exactly like broccoli, with a sweeter and less bitter flavor that most people who try them prefer. It grows in the driest, most neglected soil the garden has. It self-seeds prolifically, establishing new plants in gaps and edges without any help. It fills the earliest, hungriest weeks of the growing year, the weeks when seeds haven't germinated, beds are still cold, and there is nothing else coming from the garden at all. Once Turkish rocket is established in a garden, it persists, producing something edible every early spring from conditions that would make most vegetables fail, without being asked to, from year to year without end. 9. Kale. Kale, Crambe maritima, grows wild on coastal shingle beaches in bare gravel and salt spray. It was gathered from those beaches for centuries before being brought into kitchen gardens, where it was considered one of the great spring delicacies in British and Northern European cooking, before falling almost entirely out of cultivation. In early spring, the young shoots push up from the crown. Covered to exclude light, they blanch, producing pale, tender growth with a flavor like asparagus crossed with cabbage that is genuinely distinctive and genuinely good. The mature leaves cook as greens. The flower shoots are harvested like broccoli. The fragrant white flower clusters are themselves edible. The roots reach deep into whatever the plant is growing in, deep enough to find moisture in bare beach gravel, which is exactly why sea kale succeeds in the poorest, stoniest, most neglected corners of a garden where most crops produce nothing. Established plants produce from the same crown for 20 years or more. Root cuttings create new plants with minimal effort. A plant most modern gardeners have never heard of, that maintains itself across decades, that grows in the worst ground available, and that delivers multiple harvests each spring from a single established root. 8. Skirret. Skirret, Sium cisarum, was grown across Europe from medieval times through the 17th century, and then almost entirely displaced by the potato. The roots are slender, clustered, and white. The flavor is genuinely sweet, sweet in a way that was remarkable and valuable before refined sugar was cheap and accessible, sweet in a way that makes roasted skirret one of the more surprising and pleasant vegetables a modern gardener can serve. Each plant multiplies its root cluster year after year without replanting. Allowed to flower, it self-seeds and establishes new plants around the original. A small initial planting becomes a self-sustaining, gradually expanding patch that costs nothing to maintain. It grows in damp, poor soil where most root vegetables struggle. It is cold-hardy across all temperate climates. It did not disappear because it was a lesser plant. It disappeared because the potato fed more people per acre in the famine years that shaped European food history and survival. Skirret was lost to catastrophic circumstance, not to being inferior. Knowing that makes growing it again feel like something small being put right. 7. Welsh bunching onion. Welsh bunching onions, Allium fistulosum, do not produce a single large central bulb. They grow as clumps of upright, hollow-stemmed leaves that multiply by dividing at the base, each clump becoming larger and more productive every year without any replanting. Harvest by pulling individual stems from the outside of the clump, using the leaves as scallions or green onions, the small underground bulbs like shallots, while the center continues dividing and expanding. In mild winters, they remain productive year-round. In harder climates, they die back and return every spring without prompting. There is nothing else to do, no replanting. no seed saving, no maintenance beyond the act of harvesting from them. The clump just keeps growing, keeps dividing, keeps producing across every month the garden is active, from soil too poor or too shaded for most other alliums to perform. One planting, sustained only by use, providing fresh allium growth season after season from the same position in the ground. 6. Lovage. Lovage was grown in every serious kitchen garden across Europe and colonial America for centuries. Almost nobody grows it now, one of the quieter and more consequential losses in the practical garden tradition. A mature lovage plant stands 6 feet or more and every part is useful. The leaves, intensely flavored, with a depth and complexity that celery approaches but doesn't match, go into soups, stews, and stocks through every season. The hollow stems infuse savory drinks. The seeds are a spice. The root was eaten as a vegetable in some traditions. It grows in poor and heavy soil. It tolerates partial shade and cold winters without protection. It returns from its crown each spring, larger and more productive every year. If flower heads are left standing, it self-seeds and establishes new plants nearby. The reason it disappeared is straightforward and a little deflating. When celery became cheap to buy, people stopped growing lovage because they could purchase the nearest equivalent. What was quietly abandoned was a perennial with stronger flavor, easier cultivation, greater hardiness, and more uses than the annual it was replaced with. That substitution happened within a single generation, and almost no one noticed what had gone. 5. Jerusalem artichoke. Jerusalem artichoke was a staple food on this continent for thousands of years before European contact, and spread rapidly through European kitchen gardens in the 17th century before being displaced, once again, by the potato. The tubers taste like a mild, sweet cross between a potato and an artichoke heart. They are one of the richest plant sources of inulin, the prebiotic fiber that feeds beneficial gut bacteria more selectively than almost any other food. Roasted, they develop a deep caramelized sweetness. In soup with cream, they are among the finest things a kitchen garden produces. They grow in compacted clay, in poor and neglected corners, in the worst ground the garden has. They return from any fragment of tuber left in the ground after harvest, which makes them effectively impossible to fail at growing and effectively self-sustaining in perpetuity once established. Give them a dedicated space. They will fill it. They will produce abundantly. The flavor improves after frost, and they will be there the following year from the fragments the harvest left behind, without being asked, without any further intervention. 4. Sorrel. Sorrel is the perennial green that the modern kitchen garden has almost entirely lost, and discovering it tends to change permanently how people think about what a garden is for. A perennial clump that emerges in early spring, produces heavily through most of the growing season, goes quiet through the coldest months, and returns every year without replanting, larger and more productive each time. The flavor defines it: bright, sharp, and intensely lemony from natural oxalic acid, in a way no other garden plant replicates, and that lifts every dish it touches. In soup it is extraordinary. In a simple sauce with butter and cream it transforms salmon, eggs, and chicken. In salads the young spring leaves add a citrus brightness with no substitute and no purchase required. It grows in poor, heavy, and slightly acidic soil. It tolerates partial shade. The roots go deep through winter and survive conditions that kill most cultivated greens. It self-seeds gently without spreading aggressively. One plant in one position, producing leaves for 20 years, asking only to be left in place and occasionally harvested. 3. Perennial kale Daubentons. Annual kale must be replanted every year. Daubenton's kale grows from a woody base that returns each spring, producing edible leaves from early spring through late autumn without bolting, without going tough, without exhausting itself in a bid to set seed. The flavor is milder and less bitter than most annual kales, tender enough to eat raw in salads as well as cooked. The plant doesn't shift into reproductive mode. It simply keeps producing from the same permanent base, which grows a little larger and a little more robust each season that passes. It propagates from cuttings that root easily, meaning one original plant generates as many new plants as the garden needs over a few seasons, all of them true to the parent in a way that seed-grown kale never reliably is. Cold winters kill the leaves but rarely the roots, which return come spring and begin producing again. Brassica greens, season after season, from a plant that never needs to be started from seed again and never needs the annual cycle of preparation, sowing, thinning, and replanting that annual kale demands every single spring. 2. Rhubarb. Plant rhubarb once, and it produces from the same position for 30, 40, sometimes 50 years. The crown grows larger every year. The harvest grows with it, season after season, without replanting and without further cost. It emerges in very early spring, pushing thick crimson and pink shoots through cold ground before almost anything else in the garden has germinated, giving a harvest in the weeks when everything else is still weeks away. It tolerates extreme cold without complaint. Established crowns survive winters that destroy most cultivated plants and return the following spring indifferent to what just happened. Divide the crowns every several years, and you have more plants, more harvests, more of the same permanent and self-sustaining productivity, from divisions that cost nothing to take and establish with little more than a hole in the ground. The leaves are toxic and not eaten. The stalks are tart, distinctive and versatile, cooking into compotes, crumbles, and chutneys that carry the flavor of very early spring through the seasons that follow, from a plant that has been in the ground, doing exactly this, for longer than most of the other things in the garden have been alive. 1. Asparagus. 2 full years of patience. That is the complete price of entry. Plant the crowns. Do not harvest in year 1 or year 2. Let the plant build its root system underground, storing energy, establishing what it will need for what comes next. Let the ferny fronds grow tall through summer and feed those roots through autumn. Cut them back when they die. Mulch lightly. Walk away until April. In year 3, harvest for 4 to 6 weeks in spring. Then stop. Let the ferns grow again. Cut them back again in autumn. Walk away until April again. And repeat that for 30 years. Asparagus beds are passed down through families. They outlive the people who made them. A bed established this season will still be producing for whoever is tending that garden decades from now. Fresh asparagus cut and eaten the same morning, spears still cool from the ground, steamed briefly, dressed with nothing but butter, has a sweetness that no refrigerated, transported asparagus can carry. The sugars convert to starch from the moment of cutting. What the supermarket sells and what a home garden cuts at breakfast are the same vegetable in name and genuinely different things in reality. Your grandparents who kept asparagus beds understood something about time that most modern gardens have stopped practicing. They were not planting for the season in front of them. They were building something that compounds quietly and returns more each year than the year before, from the same ground, without being asked again. That is what all 13 plants on this list share. Not simply that they come back, but that they become something, a garden that grows more valuable, more productive, and more independent with every year that passes, because the people who built it were thinking past the season in front of them. Plant one this year. Let it show you what that feels like. Subscribe to The Quiet Garden. See you in the next one.
So hello guys, this is Raman and welcome to our channel The Quick Garden, where we will post the videos about weeds, plants and everything. So hope you will like the every video being posted in this channel, and thank you so much.